So if you do not want to be in the recording, then please turn off your video. It's 12 o'clock lunchtime on Thursday. We're very, very pleased to have with us today Bruce Arroll, hosting these webinars to support Mental Health Awareness Week. And we're delighted to have Bruce with us today. Bruce, I'm handing over to you now.
Okay. Okay, you can see that, Natalie?
Yes, we can see that.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, well, kia ora tātou, everybody. Bruce Arroll's my name. I'm a professor in the Department of General Practice and Primary Health Care. I'm a GP in Manurewa in South Auckland, and I do consultations. I do regular general practice, but also see patients or clients, as you may call them, for my colleagues and people that I pick up with distress. And I see the odd person from outside of the practice as well who seem to find me somehow. So my topic today is 3 tips for getting clients unstuck. And I use the term unstuck deliberately because I think labels for most people in primary care at least and in the community are not particularly helpful. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But this is my pepeha. The first time I did my pepeha in North America, I thought I would show some pictures. I was up in Portland in January this year. And I always like the Americans to know that New Zealand and Australia are 2 separate countries. And there's no land bridge. I used to live in Vancouver, and of course there was a border, there was a land bridge you could cross to go to America. So I was born in Auckland. Rangitoto is my monga, the beautiful Rangitoto, and there's Mount Victoria in the foreground. And the Waitemata is my moana, sparkling water. My family are from the UK. My grandfather was from Glasgow. I couldn't get him up with Glasgow on it. It seems to have disappeared. And my mother's family were from London. So we're Tauiwi, we came later. But just so you don't think I spent all my life in Auckland, I spent a year in Hamilton, Ontario at McMaster Medical School doing my family medicine training just south of Toronto. And then I moved up to north of Prince George, worked in Fort St. James, then moved down west of Kelowna to Lillooet, and then finally to Vancouver for 3 years. And I still live in Auckland, not on the North Shore, on the other side, looking back at the city there. And this is me, Bruce Arroll, and greetings to all of you. So you will have seen a handout that Groves sent out talking about this here, the link here. It's a rather grand title for my little article, which has had 1,800 downloads so far, which is quite good. We put it out in the Medical Student Journal because the medical students asked me to write an article about mental health. And of course, they're mainly young people, and young people are the peak of distress in our community. And the most recent work would suggest that levels of anxiety at least have doubled in the last 10 years. And the thought is that that may be due to social media causing all this comparison. We didn't evolve in an environment of such a lot of comparison, and suddenly you're compared to many billions of people around the world. So the problem with life is that there's no life operating manual. So I say to people, this is a form of the life operating manual. And we've all had to work it out for ourselves. And I'm sure most of you who are online today have worked out lots of things by yourself. And one of the things interesting about being involved in mental health is we're able to learn tips and techniques for ourselves. But a lot of it we learn by trial and error. The errors are painful, the trials can be painful, but that's part of being human, of course. I'm interested in acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. It's not a political party, just in case you were wondering, given this is election time. I'm interested in focused acceptance and commitment therapy, which is ACT designed for primary care. And so you may find in your general practice, depending on how big it is and where it is, you'll be getting these health improvement practitioners. Some of you may wish to become health improvement practitioners based in primary care, doing quick consultations, 15 to 30 minutes, maybe just one visit, maybe two. So the HIP model, the Health Improvement Practitioner model in New Zealand, is based on focused acceptance and commitment therapy. So I mentioned before the term stuck. So this is what's called a transdiagnostic label. So it gets away from using a label like depression and anxiety. And when I was a young doctor, I thought I could diagnose depression and anxiety. But now that I know lots more about it, I don't think I can anymore. I mean, sometimes you can tell if somebody's very depressed, they'll be stuck at home, lying in bed, not eating, not doing things. That's a very extreme force. Not eating, perhaps they need to be even hospitalized. We can probably all agree that that person's distressed. And we all know what anxiety is. We all have a little bit every day. But when it's debilitating, it's hard to know. And what I'm going to talk about is ways of getting unstuck. Labels in primary care are very little value. I need a diagnosis about once every 200 patients. And it can affect people's jobs and insurances. I talk about my 29-year-old woman who applied for the police force and initially got turned down because she had a mental health problem, which was a bit scary really, because her mistake in a sense was to come and seek help for her distress. And I would like our police force, if they experience distress, and of course they're in a very distressing job, if you had to pick the most distressing job in our community, the police would be probably part of that. They see lots of, very unfortunate things. So it does affect things like life insurance, house insurance, jobs. So I think be very careful with your labels. I've borrowed the 3 steps for dealing with stress and stuckness from Kelly McGonigal. She was on Radio New Zealand a few months ago. She's a psychologist at Stanford, and she has a book called The Upside of Stress, which is pretty good. Makes the point, actually, we do need some stress in our life. Stress is what enables us to function and grow and enjoy life. It also has the flip side, which causes problems. And she talks about 3 steps: recognizing that you're under stress, linking that to your values, and I'm going to talk about a new way of looking at how you recognize that, something I've just learned in the last year or so, and I'll refer to Dr. David Byrne's new book, Feeling Great, which has just come out in the last couple of weeks. It's already out of print because it's a bestseller in America. I could see that happening, so I ordered mine 4 months ago, and it just arrived in the mail a couple of days ago. So the 3rd step is then to take action, and I'll talk about how you take action because it requires specific issues in taking action. So the 1st step is to recognize your distress. And I use the metaphor of a dashboard warning light. And if you're driving your car and your fuel gauge comes on and flashes, presumably most of you within the next 100 kilometers would go and refuel. I know there's some people who like to see all the lights come on their dashboard, but that's not a particularly good way for running your life. So recognizing your distress is the key thing. And that takes a little bit of skill, a little bit of insight, a little bit of reflection. And there's 2 aspects of recognizing your distress. It can be, and in young people, this is often an issue. They get a racing heart, they get chest pain, neck pain, headache, breathe quickly, perhaps a sense of panic, perhaps feeling overwhelmed. And they will turn up to an emergency department with chest pain, age 20, thinking they're having a heart attack. Well, really nobody in New Zealand at age 20 has heart attacks unless you've got a very, very strong, serious family history, which hopefully you'll know about. Virtually everybody who presents in their 20s with symptoms of a heart attack is having a panic attack. And I try and encourage emergency doctors to ask a few questions about anxiety and let these people know they've got anxiety, not having a heart attack, so they stop turning up. Okay, so we've got some questions there. You're going to be getting the slides. Yes, you'll be getting the slides afterwards, so no need to write. So the second thing to recognize is avoidance. So in act, avoidance really is the cause of human suffering. And in my own case, BA here refers to me, Bruce Arroll. I don't want to go to the gym. That's the first sign I'm getting distressed. So I now go to the gym. So my dashboard warning light comes on. I don't want to go to the gym. In fact, I did it this morning. My wife is part of an online group out of Unitech, and we do exercises at home. So I arrived at work a little bit late because at 8 o'clock I started doing this online exercising because I didn't want to do it because I'm going to Tauranga this afternoon. I've got quite a busy day, and it was the best thing for me. It's put me in a great space, and I find I go to the gym and I get back in the river of life. The second thing we might do is we start avoiding people or places. The next one is to reduce pleasurable activities. We may increase substance use. We may start increasing our alcohol or other substance, cannabis, or even more concernedly, things like methamphetamine or heroin. And of course, there's a short-term gain from that. Why do people like increasing their substance use? They get a short-term release out of it. But as I say to my patients around alcohol, at least, with alcohol, you fly now but pay later. And most people who drink heavily realize that. We may spend more time in bed when we're not asleep. And I like to point out to humans that we're day-night, or I like to use the word circadian, depending on people's level of health literacy. We're day-night creatures, and we're meant to be awake during the day and asleep during nighttime, which is why things like shift work are so hard on people. We may start eating badly. I use that word cautiously. I don't think there's any such thing as bad food, but there's bad combinations and eating too much. And finally, we may decrease our levels of exercise. So these are classic avoidance behaviors, and they require reversing. Oops, we seem to be having trouble with moving the slides on. Okay, so the issue with avoidance is that we're exquisitely designed to avoid physical pain. And you've all managed to avoid physical pains in your life because you've turned up here today in one piece, or as much of one piece as you can be. So we're very good at avoiding physical pain. The problem is we do the same with emotional pain or personal issues. And that's the big mistake that humans make. We try and avoid emotional pain. So all this avoidance is designed to avoid emotional pain or personal issues. And I use a form called Work, Love, Play, and it's available on my website, www.brucearroll.com. Everything's free there. So, and you're free to use this form. It's been adapted and modified from one by Patty Robinson, who's one of the FACT founders in the United States. And it gives you like a snapshot of a person's life in just a few minutes. Very quick, and we've got some stats on it. And these are the avoidance issues. So work, love, play. We talk about work or how you spend your day. Lovers and friends, lovers and intimates, lovers and family, or play. And when I was looking at some stats on this, the statistician said to me, well, you can't change your work, can you? And I thought, well, that's actually pretty clever. You can't change your work quickly. You can't change your intimate relationships quickly, and you can't change your family quickly. But you can stop seeing your friends, and you can stop playing. And instinctively, when I do therapy, I get people to contact their friends, first thing they do, or their family. And I get them to start doing some play, exercise, or things that will give them some enjoyment. So the second thing is to acknowledge stress. And Kelly McGonigal has this lovely thing. Stress is when something that is important to you is at risk or at stake. So that is really important. And when we're feeling stressed, we might say, I'm feeling depressed or anxious, and I'm feeling hopeless and worthless. And David Burns, the psychiatrist from Stanford, who doesn't give drugs anymore, he just does a thing called Team CBT, talks about, well, when you feel stressed and start having these negative thoughts, it's actually saying what's right about you rather than what's wrong. And that's a beautiful reframe, I think. So when you're feeling worthless and hopeless, he would say, well, what does worthless say about you that's awesome and great? Well, it says that I aspire to being helpful and constructive in the community. And when I'm feeling hopeless, maybe I'm being realistic about my life situation and maybe I could change it. So it's a massive reframe. So he talks about this as attacking resistance you're dealing, because he says, well, people don't want to give up their values, and their distress is actually linking them to the values. I think that's a brilliant, and I've been using this with patients, and you get them to dial down their distress at the same time as reminding them actually that their values are at stake, and remind them what their values are. So getting distressed is when we lose touch with our values. Really important. He has a whole lot of podcasts called Feeling Good, and I would listen to some of those. They're pretty amazing. He claims, and he doesn't do research on this now, that in a 2 to 3 hour session, he can cure most people from their so-called depression and anxiety. And certainly this what's right with you rather than what's wrong with you, when people come up with these negative cognitions, I'm finding a very powerful. You can just see people and they dial down their distress. It's very powerful to watch. So the third thing is take action. So use the stress energy to do something about it. And so what you want to do is start the approach. And this may require you to do a task you're not doing. And we all know this: if you leave your tax forms and leave your tax forms and leave your tax forms, and then you finally do it, you feel okay. Secondly, you can do two things. And what I do, and I'll tell you how I learned this, is I cup my hands like this, and I ask my patients to hold that feeling lightly. Don't try and solve the problem, just experience. And then I do a mindful anchor, which I'll take you through later on. It's the first video on my website. It's an 11-minute video, and it shows me doing a whole consultation actually in 11 minutes, and I do a mindful anchor there. Okay, so the key thing in the human brain or mind is there's no delete button. Now you'll all sort of know that, but you may never have heard that term there. And so that's a very important thing. So we have to experience our distress, not try and solve it. If we do try and solve it, the solution becomes the problem. So we get insulted at work, and then we're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know you're problem solving something personal. Yeah, Alice, stunning reframing and use of valuing language. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely stunning. I can't say enough about it. So then you're both insulted at work and you have insomnia. And so you've got two problems then. So, and I always joke about this when I run groups. I say, you know, you think that I teach the stuff, I could do better, but I still wake at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I've learned to say, okay, I'm problem solving a personal problem. I need just to hold this lightly or let it go. So taken me 40 years to learn how to do that, but I finally got the hang of it. So we have to we learn these things ourselves. And this is the guy who came up with the no delete button. This is Steve Hayes, who's the founder of ACT. He's the brains behind ACT. He's in his early 70s now. He's an amazing guy. He doesn't want ACT to be a little club that you have to have a secret handshake to join. He says if you're a therapist, anyone can do ACT, basically. So he's kept it very open. And he talks about holding things lightly. And he was at this meeting in Wellington in 2015. He said there's no delete button in the human brain. How do we deal with our negative feelings and thoughts? We hold them lightly. And he held his hands down by his hips like that, sort of cupped his hands. And I'll often do that to patients. I also do a thing called a mindful anchor, where I get patients to put their hand up over here, but I'll show how that goes. So the no delete button. So the task of your brain is to keep you alive. It's not there to keep you happy. You have to learn ways to tweak it to keep yourself happy. And your brain cannot and will not forget dangerous things. You can remember every dangerous thing that's ever happened to you in your life, potentially, or silly things you've done, things that made you look foolish. So the next thing I act is this here: trust your experience, not what your mind is saying. So when you feel like having a muffin, a beer, and watching TV, remember the last time you did some exercise and how good that felt. So remind yourself that when you did something different, you actually felt good. And that the last time when you had a muffin, beer, and TV, you felt a bit fat and bloated and not impressed with yourself. So getting patients to trust our experience is a better guide to our lives most of the time, rather than what our minds are saying. Because the mind's just trying to keep you alive. It's looking for tigers. It's a tiger detector. So it can keep you alive, but it won't help you live with ease in the 21st century. So the Mindful Anchor is the first video on brucearroll.com. So you ask people what the pain is, and usually they'll come up with something, and it's usually in those core beliefs of CBT, unlovable or helpless, or in those two ranges. If someone says they're sad, that's more a secondary response. You want to do a downward arrow and say, okay, if you were sad, what would that say about you? Oh, well, I'm not good enough. So we notice it and we name it. Not good enough's in the room, isn't it? It's already here. And what I'd like you to do is show yourself some self-kindness. Now, this is an interesting step. About 30% of people I see with distress can show kindness to others, and that might have come up in the consultation, and they cannot show it to themselves. And that usually means they've got an issue with self-compassion. They can't do self-compassion. Distressed teenagers, always the case. So show yourself some kindness. And sometimes I get people to put their hand over their heart and go through, notice it, name it, show yourself some self-kindness. If they balk at that step, you sometimes have to do a bit more, and I'll come on to that. Let it go. Can you just put it over there on the other side of the room? And hopefully then they're in the so-called here and now, and they can expand on what they could do. So if they're feeling a bit calmer perhaps, and they may be able to do something they couldn't do when they came in to see you first. So what's possible now in the here and now? Self-compassion, okay. 30% of patients, I would say, and this is often your perfectionists. Some of you will be perfectionists, and if their mental processing is, if I don't do it perfectly, then I won't be loved or get affection. That's the psychodynamic thing behind that. The Kelly Wilson stall test is you're looking into the eyes of somebody you love. Who would that be? It'd be my daughter. Okay, imagine you're looking into her eyes. How do you feel about her? What would you do for her? What would you give her? How would you speak with her? What would you say with her? And if somebody says, I can't do that, you know they've got a problem with self-compassion. And I call that the stall button test. They've essentially stalled when you've tried to take them through that. Okay, so let me just move that forward one. Okay, here's some nice comments. This is from Paul Gilbert. Paul Gilbert will be doing a, if you haven't signed up to the goodfellowunit.org, you might want to sign up for that. He'll be doing some self-compassion workshops with us next year. And one of his great questions is, what is the emotional tone of the conversation in your mind? What is the emotional tone of the conversation in your mind? And with distressed teenagers, the first teenager I said this to, he was 17. I said, well, how do you talk to yourself? What's the emotional tone of that? He said, well, I call myself a piece of shit. And I said, well, it's no wonder you're anxious. It's like someone's holding a gun to your head. If I'm standing beside you shouting, you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit, that's not going to do you much good. And all the I find this is the greatest line to get teenagers, because usually they're there thinking, what am I doing here? She brought me, pointing to mum, and who the hell are you? I don't want to be here. And I feel like getting danger money at that point. And then I ask this question, and they come up with the goodies. I then invite them, can they cultivate the voice of self-kindness in their mind? Another great Paul, and this is my mantra. Since I've met Paul Gilbert, this is my mantra. Self-compassion is a great website from Kristen Neff. She's an American sociologist, actually, who's got a website called selfcompassion.org. And I ask people, I say, would you consider having a supportive personal trainer talking to you rather than a grumpy sergeant major? And I've had to be a bit careful with the term sergeant major for teenagers. Most of them don't know what a sergeant major is, so there's a little bit of education. I think most of you, if you're over the age of 30, will know what a sergeant major is. So a personal trainer that's saying kind things versus the personal trainer is saying, you're an idiot, stop doing that, grow up, you can do better. Most of us don't do very well with that. We need to have positive reinforcement. So experiential avoidance is a word that psychologists use. I break it down into emotional avoidance and behavioral avoidance. So this is emotional avoidance is the natural response to personal pain, and behavioral avoidance is the next step where we stop seeing people and doing things. But this creates a situation of context and sensitivity. So, and essentially, if you think of the depressed patient as just focusing in on all the negative things. So from a behaviorist point of view, an ACT is a behavior therapy, but thinking and emotions are behavior. You've lost the reinforcement you're getting, so you're no longer getting reinforcement. The anxious patient is not getting, they keep trying to do things. Your obsessive compulsive patients, they keep trying to do things and they're not responding to the feedback. So they too are contextually insensitive. So context and sensitivity covers both things and is sort of the underlying theory. Values and living with ease. So I like the term living with ease. So values are what's good for you in the long run, different from a goal. A goal is specific and achievable. I will wash my car on the weekend. That's a goal. A value would be, I like to have a clean and tidy car. So that's not measurable or specific necessarily. That's more, well, I like to be a tidy human being. Having said that, I don't clean my car very much, but that's another point. And we have, in ACT, we have to pursue our values sometimes in the presence of pain. And I met this lovely psychologist from Malaysia who's a Buddhist, and she talked about suffering. She had a line like, suffering is common, but suffering's okay. A very Buddhist way to look at the world. And we have to be at ease with suffering's okay, that it's okay to have these uncomfortable feelings, because in our society, it's not okay to live with uncomfortable feelings. You've got to get rid of them. You've got to have a drug. You've got to have a drink. You've got to do something. So we've got to train people to be willing to be present, experience the uncomfortable feelings, try not to solve it, okay? And my aim in life is to live with ease, but not be pain-free, because to be human is to suffer, basically, and you'll all know that. So the dashboard warning light is important. So we have to stop doing workable activities and we start doing unworkable activities, and we need to reverse this process. So that's important. The dashboard warning light, I think, is the key to resilience. I've got no evidence that that is the case, but I think if we can train people to recognize when the good things start going down, like exercise and hobbies, and the bad things go up, like drinking, smoking, and substance, or an increase in screen time is another one that can be, depends how addicted you are to screens, but we're growing a generation that are very addicted to their screens. I feel fortunate that I'm not a digital native, although sometimes I'd like the skills of a digital native. So this is the language problem. This is from Steve Hayes. And so all this for humans is the problem of language. ACT is based on his theory of language. I'll just let you read that. So just give you a couple of minutes to have a read of that. one of the comments I'll say to somebody who says, I spent all weekend in bed, and I'll say, how did that help? Did that help? And they'll say no. Or I spent all weekend drinking. Did that help? No. But we become psychologically inflexible and we keep doing these things. So there's an insensitivity to the context. So there's a great quote from Steve Hayes. Many of these rules we tell ourselves are quite helpful, but the problem-solving mind does not know when to stop. And even if it did, it does not know how. It's trying to keep you alive. And this is from his book, A Liberated Mind, which is pretty good. A colleague of mine, Tim Keneally, who's a GP in Auckland, we were talking about tiger alarms, and he says it's a bit like a smoke alarm. It can't tell if it's just the toast burning, which is fine, or the house is on fire, which is the disaster, you know. And our brains are a bit like that, you know. Once you turn the tiger alarm on, it's not going to, doesn't know how to turn itself off. So you need to turn off the tiger alarm. And the quickest way to turn off the tiger alarm with patients is to get them to breathe slowly. It immediately turns on. There's two electrical systems in the body, the autonomic, the sympathetic nervous system, which makes you run or fight. So that's the danger one. And then there's the parasympathetic, which is the alternate one, which calms you down. And if you breathe slowly, you immediately slow your heart rate and turn down the adrenaline production and things. Keeping physically fit's important. The royal road to good mental health is to be physically fit. No matter what limitations you have, you can do exercise. Kelly McGonigal has a wonderful line on this. She describes our muscles as endocrine factories. Great way to put it. Your muscles are endocrine factories, and when you exercise them, they produce hope chemicals. Isn't that a beautiful narrative? Think of your muscles as endocrine factories that produce hope chemicals. We need to take action for the procrastinator. Remind them that later is now and now is later. That's a nice little narrative you can use. Move towards the issue. Now, let's say the boss at work insults you. It may not be safe to approach the boss, but if you can say, well, when you said this, I felt very hurt by it. So that may be something, but approaching human beings, you have to be a little bit judicious about. And then either hold it lightly or use the mindful anchor, and have a look on the video for that, and you can see how that's done. It doesn't take very long. The mindful anchor works in about 9 out of 10 patients, but 1 out of 10 it doesn't. I'm not sure why, but there's a whole lot of things you can do to turn off the tiger alarm. Okay, so the 3 tips for stress are: recognize it, remind yourself that your values are at stake, and what's good about that? You've got values. And actually, I find it quite interesting, actually, we're not a country that reflects much on our values. When I raise the issue of values to people, they say, wow, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. So often it's a bit of a surprise for people. And then you must take some action. So step 1, recognize it, dashboard warning light, do something about, remember that there's something at stake here, and then take action. Okay, so just to remind you that everything on brucearroll.com is free. The first video there's another video on holding things lightly, which is at the bottom of the page. And if you're interested in learning more about this fact stuff, I'm doing an online webinar through Grow on Thursday, the 19th of November. And if you want to sign up for that, it is one you have to pay for. It's at grow.co.nz. So that's the end from me, Natalie. So, okay, reminds me of the question, what's the story you're telling yourself? Yes, that's right, because that's a bit like, what's the conversation we're having? Okay, Natalie, so any questions people got there? Shall I stop the share? We've got some questions. Where did the questions go? I seem to have lost the question. Oh, no, here we go. Just a thank you, great presentation. Wow, lovely. Anyone got some questions? Anything puzzling people?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, go for it, Denise.
When you talked about avoidance, something that I frequently have to manage is when a person dissociates. And how do you, is this not fitting into what you were trying to sort of talk about today, which was great? How, you know, what advice where would you put that behaviour in relation to what
if you're thinking of
today?
dissociation as a negative thing for you, like a safety mechanism
For the clients here.
for the client, so dissociation is a form of avoidance. So you might want to ask them what would be a way of getting out of that state. You know, there may be something physically they need to do to themselves.
Yeah.
Russ Harris in Australia gets people to put their arms around themselves.
Yeah.
You might want to do a mindful anchor. I think sometimes that's why people cut themselves, is because they're in a dissociated state. So trying to do something that's safe, pinching themselves, something physical or something psychological. I think asking people what might work, because people may have some ideas, but I guess you as a therapist would have lots of little things you could do. I don't see too many people who get into dissociation. Actually, I use dissociation to get people out of phobias, which is quite interesting, using the neuro-linguistic programming technique. But,
I have a big woven ball that see, I have a big woven ball, and if I see the early trigger signs, I will start throwing that backwards and forwards. And
okay.
Focus.
Are you thinking like a panic attack as a dissociation?
Well, they are clients that are on, you know.
Yeah, because one thing you can do with a panic attack is stand beside them and do gentle CPR, not full CPR, because if they're breathing quickly, you can then control their breathing, and you just say the worst's over, just soothing words, and you don't normally have to ask permission because people are very tied up in their heads in that point. So I've only done it a few times. Sometimes people with asthma will come in and they're panicking, and you can just slow them down. So we do this with asthmatics, and you start to control their breathing. So that's something you can do if it's okay to touch your patients, of course.
Yeah, well, some of them wouldn't be a wise move, you know.
No. So I think
you've given me some more things to think about.
Yeah, I think using your experience and asking them to participate, you know, what do they think might work, offer some things psychological or physical that aren't harmful. Obviously, you don't want people cutting. You know, because how to help someone get unstuck if they don't recognize they're stuck? Well, I guess if they're coming with distress, they are stuck, aren't they? So I don't have that as a big problem, actually, because I think people seeing me are usually coming, they want something done about their distress. Okay, so I've got a long question here from Rachel. Just reflecting here, I like that you brought values really strong into the conversation, because something that I've noticed which can be really difficult for clients is when they are emotionally avoiding the idea that things could get better. Bringing values back into the conversation might be a good way to grow the motivation. Yeah. On my website, I have a list of things called killer narratives. There's 155 things here. There's a little section on motivation. And sometimes if people don't want to do things, I will say to them, you can't sit here and make yourself feel better. You have to start doing things. And since I've been doing FACT, I've become much pushier, you know, and I point out they're the boss. I'm merely their coach, and I can make suggestions. It's up to them to do things about it. So the onus goes back onto them. Waiting is costly. That's from my supervisor, Robin Walser. That's a great line. Well, waiting's costly. You don't want to do anything, waiting's costly. Life is ticking over. So there's some nice little, I'll leave it to later. Now is later, later's now. There's some quite nice little paradoxes that you can use. So you might like to look at the killer narratives. Yeah. Okay, can you replace the mindful the mindful exercises? Certainly, yeah, mindfulness I see is not relaxing people, it's getting people to focus on the now rather than be in the past and in the future. So it's not a relaxation technique. And I've got a lovely little, which I could email to you, Natalie, Sharon Salzberg, It's a loving kindness meditation. Sharon Salzberg is the go-to person in America for Barbara Fredrickson, who's the guru of positive psychology. And I emailed this little 5-minute one. It was on the Calm website at Auckland University. It's since been replaced with one that's nowhere near as good. It's just 5 minutes long. It's on my phone. And when the world's getting on top of me, I have 5 minutes of Sharon, and she usually sorts me out. So I'll put it on in the car if I've had a bad day or a bad clinic. I pop Sharon on for 5 minutes. And it's may you be safe, may be healthy, may I be happy. May I live with ease. She's not saying you can't live without suffering. Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, can't sit here and make yourself feel better. Really feels relevant to some of the cases I've been thinking about at the moment. We'll definitely look that up. Yeah, it depends if you've got mandated clients, that can be a whole different thing. But Russ Harris deals with mandated clients by saying, well, we've got two options here. We've got time. We can work on something to make your life run better, or we can just sit here and waste our time. What do you want to do? And, you know, again, that's dealing with the resistance of people. Looking forward to having a look at the website. Thank you very much. Interesting presentation. I loved a bit of Sharon. Yep. Okay. Could this be adapted for children? I tend not to see a lot of children. Depends what you mean by children. I see some teenagers. And as I say, I find that what's the emotion, because they're all distressed if they're coming in. What's the emotional tone? And it's almost as if they think you're almost mind reading them. That's what's interesting. Because when you ask them what the emotional tone is, they say, can he see what I'm thinking? You know, really, it's extraordinarily powerful. Try it with the next teenager you have in your office. What's the emotional tone of the conversation in your head? I don't know about young children. I know at primary school they do mindfulness now. And I do variations of this. I think a lot of teenagers have issues with thinking. CBT is the cognitive stuff is also good. There aren't a lot of cognitive techniques in ACT. One of them is to say to somebody, I'm having a feeling, I'm thinking that I'm worthless. So then you might say, I'm having a feeling that I'm feeling worthless. And then I notice I'm having a feeling that I'm feeling worthless. And then I notice that I'm noticing that I'm having a feeling that I'm worthless. So it's pushing it away, creating some distance. And with distance comes psychological flexibility. The first name for ACT was actually comprehensive distancing, and that was distancing yourself from your emotions. And I guess the thing with mindfulness is it may enable you to step outside yourself and see what your emotions are. Okay, so we got any questions we haven't answered there, Natalie?
There was one question that I saw a little bit earlier. How could you effectively work with someone who does procrastination quite a lot?
Yeah, it depends what they were presenting with, basically. I mean, in the end, all you can say is you might want to label it and say, well, your problem's procrastination. If you don't want to do anything about it, you may have to learn to live with it, basically. I'm not sure I can help. Or maybe you need another therapist. Now, the interesting thing about firing a patient or a client is they don't want to be fired. I've never managed to fire anybody. Whenever I bring it up, they all want to stay. Because I look like a much more honest person. I say, look, I don't seem to be helping you. I think you need to see somebody else. And or you have to make some terms and conditions. You say, look, I'm here to work for you. If you don't want to do stuff, let's quit now. Life's too short for me. I want to see my clients moving. Movement is important. And you know, I want to sort of save the world before I die. And I wouldn't be too, you know, if somebody just wasn't willing to do something, they're not going to get better. We know that doing your homework is key to getting better. People who finish these online programs do incredibly well, as opposed to people who drop out. So you can relate procrastination to other things in their life. Perhaps they're procrastinating with you in the office. You say, well, how is this working for the rest of your life? So bring in evidence from the rest of their life. Well, it's not working at work, is it? The boss is always telling you off. Do you want to live a more more interesting, fruitful life? What's important to you? Maybe a values discussion would be good there.
Yeah. We got one last question here. How to help someone to get unstuck if they don't recognize that they are stuck?
Well, as I sort of said before, they generally will, because they're seeing you with distress, unless you're meeting people socially, if they're coming to see you as a client,
Yes.
there is a hidden contract there that they're distressed and they want to do something about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody didn't recognize they were stuck, I might have to just say, well, look, my view is that you're stuck and you're not willing to do anything about it. I think we should part company.
Yes.
You know, you really, you can't work with somebody who doesn't work, but that's pretty rare. I can't really think, I don't see mandated clients, so everybody who's seeing me is off their own volition, so I don't really have a problem with that. So,
Yeah.
well, I seem to be pretty happy with the show. So,
Yes,
yeah.
I see lots of appreciative comments in the chat. So thank you, everyone. This was
Okay, well, have a look at the website. Have a look at the killer narratives.
Absolutely.
There's some lovely ones there. Okay.
Yes. I will send you the slides and the link to the recordings. If
And
you
I'll send you the Sharon
webinar.
Salzberg thing. I'll email that to you now. Yep.
That
Okay.
would be fantastic.
So you'll all get a Sharon Salzberg. Thanks, Bernice. Bye-bye. Thanks, George. Nice to see you.
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Ka kite.
Thank you.